Welcome everybody who is joining us today. We appreciate your taking the time to do so for our discussion today on, as you can see here, a high ROI path to data insight for your SaaS data silos. So we appreciate those of you who were originally going to join us last week. We ended up changing that to this week, but we're excited to get started today. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Paul Hardy. I'm our EVP of Professional Services here at Ironside. I've been here for 5 years, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jeff Spear. He is the practice director for both data engineering and BI teams that we have here. And Jeff's been here for a lot longer than that, but I won't age you that way, Jeff. So
I appreciate that.
So this is kind of the conclusion of our winter series of Take30. We appreciate those of you who have joined. What you see here are some of the other sessions we've done already this winter. Those are available on demand at the URL that you see listed above. You can see all those pretty winter pictures. Thankfully, those are bygone now when we're officially into spring. So Jeff and I are kicking off the spring, I guess, rather than closing out the winter. I think that feels better. And a little bit of an obligatory commercial on Ironside. We have many of our returning friends and clients here, but for those that don't know Ironside, we are a dedicated data and analytics consultancy. We've been around for 25 years, so we've been doing this a very long time, more than 900 clients. We've been partners with AWS now for 5 years. We're an advanced tier consulting partner, something that we're very proud of and worked hard to do. And we've been around much longer, even with IBM. We've been a platinum partner of IBM for 15 years. We have multiple technology partnerships, not just AWS and IBM, but those are particularly lengthy and challenging. And we operate in the 6 industries that you see listed to the right. Having 900 clients, we've operated in many more. And some of the areas that aren't really listed there are work that we've done in pharma and medical device. And increasingly today, we have a number of clients in the franchisor space, interestingly enough, that span the areas like business services that you see there in retail. Very interesting, very challenging businesses. So we welcome our colleagues and friends who come from that world as well. We really do 5 things here. We have 5 practices: data strategy, BI, data science, which we've been doing for 7 years. Of course, it's a very hot area right now. We're very proud of the work that we've done there. We've implemented and deployed dozens of machine learning use cases. Of course, today with a large focus on generative AI, which has really driven the popularity of AI. So we're excited that our team has great experience doing that. Data engineering underpins all of those. And we'll talk a lot about data engineering activities today. And lastly, managed services, where we operate both traditional BI environments as well as cutting-edge cloud environments today on an ongoing managed services basis. So that's what we do at Ironside, all dedicated in data and analytics. So let's get talking about today's subject. So what's our objective today is to help you learn to embrace that multi-platform SaaS environment that you might find frustrating, and doing so by taking a pragmatic approach to creating real value, right? And overcome the perceived complexities. Because today, as you can see here, many SaaS platforms are really core to business. You'll see we have a big theme about enabling flexibility of your own business model and business processes. And we think SaaS platforms are terrific tools in making that happen. And we'll talk about how to really leverage them and from an analytic perspective and how to overcome challenges with doing that. So who do we think this applies to? Very importantly, growth companies. Many growth companies that we've worked with, they've kind of bootstrapped themselves up over time through a set of best-of-breed applications, SaaS applications. So that means today they have a big portfolio of these SaaS applications. And at the time, they were probably smaller companies. They were looking at SaaS for perhaps cost savings. It might have been less expensive. Sometimes that might have been less functional than more expensive platforms. And today we've seen many that are thinking about, therefore, changing out those platforms. That can certainly be a painful and complex process. And maybe some of the things we talk about today will help you forego that kind of a change if you're experiencing some frustration with how to maximize your data value out of what were the original set of SaaS platforms that you had as a growth company. But this also applies to more mature companies. Today, of course, the easy accessibility, the extended functionality of certain SaaS platforms mean that even large mature companies that have perhaps large on-prem legacy systems and a smattering of SaaS systems are reaching out to look at those new SaaS capabilities. And what we're going to talk about here is perfectly applicable to that as well. And there are also a whole set of companies today that are really focused about vendor lock-in. A lot of SaaS systems that people use are today adopting, as an example, more AI capabilities, and clients are feeling the need to potentially migrate into some of those platforms that have extended AI capabilities. We don't think that's necessary. In fact, we don't think that's necessarily the best approach to AI, even those systems may have onboard AI. We think other machine learning capabilities that leverage multiple data platforms are actually more powerful for you from a business perspective. But those are companies that that also, I think, can learn a lot from this discussion. So,
and also, vendor lock-in is not just AI, right? There can be, vendors have limiting reporting capabilities or ability to add, your own calculations or other things, where especially on a SaaS platform, you're limited to what they've, enabled you to do, and sometimes that's just a little bit restricting.
Right, and it's the case too, Jeff, right, where we've seen some of the larger SaaS platform developers that aren't best of breed across different segments of capability. So, which brings us to this: why multiple SaaS platforms today? Well, first of all, take a big sigh of relief. You're not a bad guy because you have multiple SaaS platforms. You've done it again for the right reason, putting together best of breed capabilities and functionality. At the time, again, they might have been best value, right? You're getting a lot of functionality at a reasonable cost. Ease of manageability because they're cloud-based, particularly for growth companies that are starting up without a large infrastructure, right? It's speed to access, speed to results, very important. And most importantly, from our perspective, what SaaS platforms enable you to do is provide the flexibility so you can create your own unique business model and processes. I mentioned earlier we work with a lot of franchisor companies. Each of them bring to the world their kind of special sauce, and they need those unique capabilities, expressed through the platforms that they have. And it's hard to be that unique when you're focused on, some of the larger SaaS platforms, as opposed to being able to pull together those best of breed applications in a way that builds that unique business process and business model. So, we're very supportive of SaaS platforms for that. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I mean, with that particular example, right, there's a dedicated SaaS platform for franchise development called FranConnect, and obviously it meets very specific needs. And if you're in the franchising, business, or doing it, running a franchise business, then having that functionality is really valuable. And so it makes sense that you want to customize and use a tool that does exactly what you want it to do.
For sure. However, there's a but there, as you can see, and that is that, are you developing what we call data silos, and the title of this presentation, or islands of automation, right? And when you do that, there is a difficulty in maximizing data insights that can be generated from all of this important disparate data, and this data that's mapped to your unique business processes and business model. So that's what we're going to talk about, is how do we solve that problem? So first of all, why is it a problem? What are the symptoms that you suffer when this occurs? The one that you'll notice, and we see with clients most notably, is this impact on productivity and related costs. That really is manifest in this need to hire analysts, folks that are, that you hire because of their analytical skills, but who in fact end up spending a great deal of time pulling data out of these multiple systems and integrating them via spreadsheets, right? And if you find that you're hiring more of those, it should be a warning signal that perhaps you should be taking another approach, right? You'll find that those analysts are actually spending, again, less time actually analyzing and using the great skills and capabilities you've hired them for, and more of it standardizing and aligning data. And we'll talk a lot about that as kind of the core of the problem of the siloed data. It's not necessarily access, it's that standardization to make it useful, right? And these analysts end up doing the same tasks, again, repetitively, daily, weekly, monthly. The next issue that we see a lot of is data trustworthiness, right? So the fact that an individual is pulling this data from disparate systems into spreadsheets isn't always done repetitively with the same level of discipline, right? So what's often believed to be a question that should have the same outcome actually has different answers. You've probably seen many times when people are asking for a particular metric, one part of the organization says the metric is X, another says it's Y. I think, Jeff, there was a particularly interesting example of that you've dealt with recently.
Yeah, we had a situation where it was actually with a franchise organization, and the question was what counts as an active customer, and we actually went through a lot of requirements gathering and came up with the definition of this is what it was, and we released that and rolled the reporting out. And then the feedback came from a broader audience that actually no, there was a specific group of people who had purchased a certain option that we had specifically excluded that actually needed to be included. And so, that process, that discussion just sort of surfaced the fact that different people had a different opinion on, what it was like to be an active customer, what that definition was. And it took a lot of discussion to get to that point.
And therefore, the numbers they reported for that mismatched across different parts of the organization until it was solved in the work that we did. So another issue, reporting, right? If you've built spreadsheets and you're doing them one-off with a lot of human interaction, then the ability to put that information together over time becomes even more challenging because, again, those definitions are going to slip over time. But most importantly, if you're looking at all of the SaaS applications that you have and you're convinced that you've got the right pieces, but you need to pull those pieces of data together to create deeper insights, then this is a real opportunity that we believe in. And those insights, may come up in kind of two forms. One is you're doing better reporting, better visualizations, the ability to see the relationships between data better. But very importantly, it's through AI and ML-based analytics, right? If you have the right trusted data and more of that data, then the beauty of machine learning is its ability to handle more of that data to draw better insights and better predictions. Now, and increasingly today, in order to boost the signal in those machine learning and AI use cases, you can integrate in third-party data as well, right? So external data sources. So if you thought you had a problem with data silos coming from just your internal SaaS systems, that is a bit exacerbated potentially by pulling in external data sources. But the good news is the architectures we'll talk about accommodate that in a way very equivalent to what they're doing with the perceived data silos of your own SaaS systems. So what is the solution to all of this? Frankly, this is not going to be a massive surprise. It is an integrated data architecture, right? And we view this slide as our sort of data analytics high-level process overview. So what does it mean? If you start on the left here are these sources that we're talking about, right? You see internal systems, a lot of acronyms there, but acronyms we're probably all familiar with, and those represent many of the SaaS systems that we've acquired in our businesses to get up and running, and which today, as we have grown, have that less ability to integrate, less ability to communicate. Beneath that, under sources, you see external sources. So we were just talking about the increasing value today from the type of data you see listed there: demographic data, geolocation, even weather data. We ourselves have integrated weather data with some of our clients in AI use cases to help them predict demand from clients based on how bad weather may occur, or when equipment is going to be returned based on the weather. So lots of good reasons to integrate external data, but how do you deal with that complexity? So the next step in that process is surprisingly integrations, right? So you see typical things listed there: APIs, ELT, ETL, data pipelines, downloads, lots of different ways to integrate that data to build what is the key to this next step, the core data asset. I'm going to let Jeff talk a little bit about the core data asset.
Yeah, sure. And I'll start quickly by talking about integrations. I think one of the big differences with SaaS silos is that it's usually harder to get the data out, and most often the data is only available via APIs. And of course, each SaaS provider has their own API. So it's, you sort of have to often, do some custom work to understand what data you can get out and how you get it out and how the best way to get it out is. Sometimes you're lucky and there's, sort of some sort of third-party connector that makes it easier, but especially when you're sort of off doing very specialized things, that's less likely to be the case.
Right. And Jeff, that sort of step is all that work that manual analyst has been doing repetitively is now going to be replaced by automation.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so what you want to do is create this data asset that contains all that data. And so you're going to do a lot of cleansing and deduplication and getting formats matching. But really, the most important thing you're going to do here is apply your business logic and data definition. So, another example we've seen is, you're bringing in data on transactions and retail sales and that kind of thing. And if you're doing a sales revenue report, there's going to be certain criteria. Like, for example, if someone's using a gift card they already purchased from you, then any purchase they make, if they buy a t-shirt, that doesn't count as revenue because you already got the revenue when you bought the gift card. So you have to find those and filter them out, and the revenue report won't include them. But if you're running a report on what t-shirt size is most popular, you want to make sure you include that transaction because it was someone buying a t-shirt, and what size they got is highly relevant. And so, but if you took those two reports that now have different filters for different reasons and added up the number of t-shirts sold in each of them, they're going to be different, and they're different for a reason. And so you have to sort of have the business logic and have the conversations to understand why they're different and make sure that that difference makes sense. And more importantly, make sure that difference doesn't lead to any confusion. So that kind of business logic, that kind of ownership of your data and what it can do for you is the core reason to build this kind of data asset. And then the other one is, as you can see in this diagram, is that it lets you do things like store the history. Often these SaaS systems, they're great at giving you what's the current state, but once someone changes something, it can be difficult to know what it used to be. And sometimes that history is super important for trend reporting or other types of analytics. So once you own the data, you can store those historical periods however you want and report on them.
Particularly important for machine learning applications, Jeff, right? To have that trend data historically to be able to train your models for predictability in the future.
Very true.
And what's important about this step, building this asset, is when it's done, you see at the bottom of this slide, what you have now is trusted data, right? It's reflecting your business logic, your data definitions, no more two different parts of the organization having a different answer to the same question, right? And that's your foundation for scalability. That trusted data is that foundation to scale up. So, right, so then what do you do with that data? Well, a lot of interesting things. You see the next step is analyze, lots of different ways to analyze things that are listed there, again, including AI and ML. And then the last step is to automate that whole process so those analysts can now spend their time actually being analysts and not being, spreadsheet mavens. So, and so that you see there, visualize and manipulate, right? That output it can itself be automated through typical BI platforms today with those types of visualizations, and also can feed feature stores and data pipelines for your machine learning applications that themselves are, often at times integrated back into your business processes. So, right. So this is kind of the nirvana of state of what you can do with all of your SaaS applications, with the ultimate benefit being you're still maintaining your special sauce through those best of breed applications, your business model, your business processes. But now you've got your business logic applied to all of that data. So now comes this part about pragmatic we talked about. How do you get this done in the real world, right? And when you look at that picture, it's a beautiful thing going left to right. It's very logical, but we're the first to tell you it's impractical. You saw that big box that had all of those SaaS systems. You yourselves may have a large number of SaaS systems in that portfolio. You can't simply go left to right in what we would call the big bang, right? If you start just integrating all of your data sources into one big asset, not only do you not know what business logic to use necessarily if it's not applied to a use case, but it's going to be very high cost, very long duration. So, our philosophy is do not approach this from a big bang perspective. That's sort of step one in this point of pragmatism, right? And if you start just focusing on use cases, though you run into other pitfalls if you start on the far right, right? In some use cases, they won't have the current quality or availability of data that you need. So you should not blindly just go over use cases that you think, as an example, might have the highest numerical ROI for you, if it turns out that in fact the data is not good. So you really have to focus on both of these, find a middle ground, and we call that actually working right to left, because you do want to start on that right side with use cases, because you're not going to build a big bang. You're going to build only what you need to meet the needs of the use cases that you've determined are the most important at first, right? Have to analyze that data, but also have to focus on the right use cases. So, how do you pick the use case? Well, look, it's got to have good business value. Notice that doesn't say great. It doesn't have to be the most highest return economically speaking. It's got to be something that can just be successful, right? It may solve a critical need or a problem, meaning that you get more qualitative value potentially than quantitative value from it. But if that's what's important from an adoption perspective, that's fine. It's really about getting those first wins, right? A motivated sponsor also helps you get those first wins. Is there a sponsor within the organization that that is experiencing that pain of a problem that you can solve, and they're willing to invest in it? And importantly, have a process to align on those. What you'll see is in this process, you will uncover many use cases, which is okay, but you do need a process to facilitate alignment on those, so you know which ones to begin on early, so you're not doing a big bang right from the start, right? So start small, produce results, and then grow from there, right? Um, Another step with respect to the data, narrow the initial data set. Many of those systems we talked about, again, you don't want to do them all at once, back to the Big Bang thesis, and produce results fast. And for us, that typically means that there's some BI visualization that is going to be a result of this, whether it's simply to demonstrate data that can be analyzed by your analysts that we talked about earlier, whether it is even typically it can still be feeding spreadsheets, but this is a good opportunity if you don't already have a good BI capability to integrate it, to create it while you're creating this data asset. So, Jeff, any comments on that?
No, I would say, yeah, it's just you whether you have a BI tool or bring in a new one, it's good to use that, because that'll show you the data and just give you a sense of whether things are making sense or not right away, and help you find, definitional questions or other issues with the data.
Right. Definitely let you talk about this a little bit more then.
Yeah, so this is what this approach looks like, where, in the middle is, like Paul said, that goal, or at least the first version of that goal. And so when we come in and do sort of a strategic data and analytics advisory, we're coming at it from these two directions. We're going to do a technical assessment, and we're going to look at use case discovery and prioritization. And so you do these things in parallel, and then sort of those together help you figure out what the through line is to create an initial MVP that is something that you can do because you have the data, and is something that you want to do because it provides good value. And so, often looking at the data and talking to the people who know the data will help identify both, are there issues? Hey, we don't trust this data, or we can't get access to this data yet, or say, hey, like everyone keeps asking me for this. And then we could go and look at the stakeholders who are explaining what the use cases are, and say, hey, you're always asking about this data. Why is that? And surface those use cases, and then figure out what the best place is, what the best first effort is that combines those two things, creates sort of a core data asset that provides a lot of value and gives you a foundation to grow. Because when you get that perspective of, okay, we're not going to do these other use cases, but we know they exist, then we can do some planning for them, so that when it comes time to add those things in, add that data in, provide those solutions, we've at least done some initial thought about it. It's not a complete surprise. You can never plan for every eventuality, of course, but you can sort of plan for the big ones and make some basic assumptions. And so the end result of this is to create a minimum viable product, or MVP, that hits that use case, that uses data that you can get now. And of course, that isn't too big in scope. So it's something that gets produced quickly, gets value quickly, and builds momentum so you can keep going.
Right, Jeff, it satisfies that key sponsor that we talked about, or solves that problem, and drives adoption, right?
Exactly.
Proof of value. So what does that, Jeff talked about growth in this process. What does that look like? By starting small, not starting with the big bang, it doesn't mean that you're hamstrung somehow. Rather, you will have a whole series of phases that can be undertaken as your needs remain unsatisfied and as your budget, allows. So it looks something like this, these phases. On the left-hand side is that kind of assessment of those current systems and those proof of value use cases. And what we also say is during that period, it's a good time to look at the BI and cloud data platforms that you want to use to implement this. Again, you may have relationships already with these types of vendors, but if we didn't state it, obviously, today's data assets that we describe, live in the cloud. So this is the right time to pick that cloud data platform and that BI platform. If you don't have them already, and if you do have them, they can also be used. So that's a relatively fast exercise, right? Again, typically for us, it's 3 weeks. And then that next first phase is the build of those proof of value business cases, so that you have the MVP that Jeff mentioned. Now, importantly, in this, what we don't do is actually productionalize these initial use cases. All right, we want to make sure that you get to MVP as soon as possible. The key stakeholders actually agree to and adopt what has been developed. and then productionalize them. The good news is once you've productionalized these initial cases, that is leverageable work. You've now built all the necessary security and other issues associated with the production environment that will be reused now as you build more use cases in your use case portfolio over time. And those simply look like additional waves that you would then see here in the center of the chart: wave 2 use case development, wave 3 use case development. And those things are paced based on the prioritization of the use cases that you've seen, which by the way can change based on changing needs over time, and the amount of investment that you have as it becomes available to grow the data asset. And oftentimes you can pick the prioritization of those cases based on which data sources they leverage. If you don't need to take the expense to add another data source, work on use cases that won't require that additional integration, right? And when it comes time to add another data source, that's just another chunk of cost that you can budget in. And then lastly, at the bottom here, you see complete a broader data strategy. And what's the most important part of that is governance. So the point is you've had a huge investment in this work, hopefully not too huge, but what we want to do is overcome the slipping back into a world where your data issues associated with different silos return, and governance is absolutely critical to that. So that's the last thing we're going to talk about briefly. I'm going to let Jeff talk about that.
Yeah, and don't do what we did and leave governance till the end. So the most important thing is when you have lots of different silos, that means even when you integrate the data, you have lots of different places people can go to get answers. And so getting an organizational wide conversation going about how do we define our things, how do we make sure that people know where to go for the right answers, how do people know that, you know, if I go to this SaaS system and ask for a number, it's going to be different from the central data asset because it's an incomplete picture. And maybe it's because we're not looking at another system that has similar data, or we haven't applied our logic. And so setting up a structure to do that, understanding what the important policies are, and then you put specific processes in place and have people to sort of stand behind that. All of that is important. And I will say in this slide that technology is at the end here on purpose, because while technology is important, you do not want to let your technology drive your governance. You want to see what you need and then find the right tool to do it. So don't go out and buy a massive data catalog tool. See what your data catalog needs are, and then find the tool that fits those needs.
Yeah, Jeff, the important thing here are those in the center of the people. It's the stewards and the custodians that are become the caretakers of those definitions that you've worked so hard to standardize coming from all of those different systems, right? It's that back to your client business logic and data definitions. They are the folks that are truly the custodians and stewards of those. So, and that's where we're going to wrap it up. So, you know, just to summarize all of this, a portfolio of SaaS platforms, they do in fact offer tremendous value. And again, for us, the key is tremendous flexibility so that you can maintain your special sauce, your unique business value to your customers. It does create some siloed data that can make it difficult to extract analytic value, but it's critical that you do so. You can do it through this integrated data architecture that we've talked about. It implements, again, your business logic and definitions and creates the trusted data and the scalability that you'll need to grow. And I'm sure many of you today, you know, find frustration through all of the manual interventions you do today that inhibit that scalability. Right, this will enable that scalability. This implementation can be done pragmatically. Don't do the big bang. Don't go left to right, even though that picture makes a lot of sense. Pick the use cases that provide value, that will drive adoption, and integrate only the data sources that you need to meet those initial use cases. Then take a phased approach that will grow as your budget and your needs grow. And then lastly, and as Jeff said, shouldn't be last, but governance is absolutely essential to create and to secure that value that you've now invested in. So that's our discussion for today. Thank you for hanging on here. We've come right to the end. We're willing to hang on if there are any additional questions. Jeff, I don't know if any came in for the transom here while we were.
We did get a couple, but actually, since we're at time, I think if you submitted a question, we'll get back to you and make sure you get an answer. And if there's anything that's particularly generally applicable, we'll add it to this. And thank you all for your questions.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.